We're live. It is Wednesday, August 5th, 2020, 5:01 p.m. We're a minute late owing to Crowdcast technical difficulties in making our guest visible. Before I turn things over to Kate for a very important monologue, I have a super important announcement to make, which is that the Brookings Institution has announced that it will not reopen the Brookings Institution until January 4th, 2021, which means that Kate is going to be in her exile for a while. I am going to be in my exile for a while. And that kind of indicates that perhaps in lieu of fun is going to be going on for a while longer yet. So, Kate, the monologue is yours today.
Oh yeah. So, well, I am just thrilled with that news. I like, have certainly done, um,
He's like,
certainly.
oh my God, what did I do to deserve this?
No, I'm actually. I obviously I do really look forward to this and love it. I it has. I'm like I'm a little tired, not of you, of like actually like it's like this has been like a lot of like it's like gradually been a lot of work, but it's also kind of become less work in other ways because it just has become like we're gotten more used to it. But anyways, that is a monologue for a different day. Um, I wanted to talk about kind of this crazy. You were talking about today. We were just kind of discussing various people and how we banned them on platforms for being trolls or being abusive, and then they would just pop back up as like another person writing in the exact same tone. And I said to you, have you heard about this crazy professor that had did this whole thing? It's been circulating on it's got written up in the New York Times and BuzzFeed and stuff, and you hadn't heard about it. So I'm going to tell you about it. And I'm sure other people have read about this, which is just this crazy story of this woman named Beth Ann who ran a account called science_by on Twitter that had a ton of followers, including a number of people that I like and admire, and was apparently a Native American bisexual scientist, like woman in STEM, working as a professor at Arizona State University, who over the course of like many years was like this very high profile kind of person, led like she and another person led this thing called Me Too STEM, that was kind of like got shut down for various reasons a while ago. Anyways, it's a long story, but the basic gist of it is a couple of days ago, this woman and another woman that knew this account announced that her name is Beth Ann, announced that the account who had been talking about her coronavirus affliction and had died of coronavirus uh, related things. And this woman, Beth Ann, gave this heart-rending thing about how they were going to how sad this is, how bad this is for STEM, how bad this is for everyone, how this is because the university didn't close and kept teaching. Um, and they were going to go and get Hopi tattoos together, but they didn't end up doing that because she got coronavirus. And so now that she's dead from corona, and this is terrible. At which point people were like, hey, Arizona State, what happened to this person? And Arizona State was like, we don't have any single faculty that matches his description, or a person that has anyone who has like no one has notified us, loved ones or friends of like a faculty member dying from the coronavirus. At which point all of a sudden people started to like look into this account, and it turns out that Beth Ann, this woman who had announced that was the same woman who was running the account of the Native American, like at science_by account, as well as a number of other accounts that supported it and retweeted it constantly and liked it. And that like these accounts had a long history of being remarkably like abusive of various people in various communities, or like accusing people of various behaviors. And it was this entire, including a friend of mine who is an expert in disinformation, it was actually actively a friend with this person, and like also obviously a victim of kind of this coordinated misinformation attack. It is insane. The story is just this incredible, incredible story about how this kind of stuff can happen and online, and people that you think are real people and that you see other people follow that you trust and admire don't actually know this person, and so there is actually very little trust. And how people can be taken in by people that seem to espouse the same politics as them and like kind of just say the same things, and like then they'll just kind of like sign up to follow them and retweet them, and they're not actually real people, and they can be nefarious. I am a real person. Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. This is like a very elaborate deep fake that I've done for 132 fucking days. um but my point is like all of this being said is like actually we're not allowed to have fun anymore. Neither are our imaginary selves that exist online in various personas. But we do have Nate Persily here to talk to us about elections, and I hope a little bit about kind of like disinformation and misinformation campaigns and elections, and some of the things that are being done to kind of stymie this type of craziness. But I would encourage everyone to go and read kind of some of the reporting on this. It is absolutely crazy. And it's like a really great like moment as we're all existing more online of like making sure you check your six, making sure that you know exactly what it is that you're reading is real, even when it really seems like it is. So Nate, so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So first, prove you're you. Are you really?
Are you
really Nate? Are you really Nate Persily? And does Nate Persily actually exist?
Yeah, well, this is what an election law administration disinformation person looks like during an election, which is I'm starting to get like the Mario Cuomo bags under my eyes at this point. I wouldn't say I ever had a lustrous mane of hair, but I think I've lost more hair than most people have gained during this pandemic because I've never worked this hard on anything in my life. I have to say that the problems with this election are just so varied and constantly changing that it's really been a challenge. And so, yeah, so I'm that person who is sleep deprived, and so unless you can find someone who has a better claim to those pressures, this is who I am. So there you go.
All right, let's start with an update. When you were last on In Lieu of Fun and the Lawfare podcast, you gave a kind of a bleak picture of where we were in terms of readiness to have this election. Has there been improvement / progress, or is it just as bad, and since we're closer to the election than we were then, therefore worse?
So I think the problems have changed. I today am feeling a little bit more optimistic, having spoken to half a dozen election officials in the last day. I think that there are some of the problems that we've seen in the primaries are being addressed, but there are new problems that are emerging. And so I can go down the battleground states and talk about what I think the problems are in each one. Maybe I don't know whether we should start there, or maybe get there. But the thing that I'm worried about this week, I think a lot of people are worried about, is the Postal Service and whether it's going to be functioning and robust and sort of not politicized in the run-up to the election. I think that there are jurisdictions, and for that matter, the Democratic Party is trying to work around that, and there's now been a concerted move to ballot drop-off boxes, which will not require the Postal Service. But you can't. We're reaching the point where you can't really do much of anything. I was on NBC Nightly News last night and said that we've got 2 weeks to make any significant changes. And I was starting to feel ambivalent about having said that because, well, there are certain things that we can do in a month. It really isn't just 2 weeks. But for any major change, any major structural change that we want to make for this election, the time is basically running out. And so I'm still, there are going to be widespread problems. There will be late mail ballots. There will be hundreds of thousands, perhaps over between 1 and 2 million ballots that will not be counted because of either lateness or errors. There will be some lines in polling places that we don't exactly know where, and that's something where I think changes in the next month could make a difference. But I think that that the baptism by fire that some of these states had in the primaries has had a payoff. So I think Wisconsin is actually Wisconsin and Michigan are in a better position now than last time we spoke. I'm still very concerned about Pennsylvania and Philadelphia in particular. I think Florida is, people I talk to down there, I mean, Florida, I think I've said this before, it actually has some of the most professional election officials in the country, maybe because they've had so many problems, over the last 2 decades, but they are, Florida is in a good position because they have in recent elections had a third vote by mail, a third early, and a third vote in person on election day. And so they have most of the infrastructure that's necessary to move to majority vote by mail. And so I think that they will do that. North Carolina has been surprisingly non-political up till now, but I don't expect that to last since that's been sort of the cauldron for so many problems. Georgia does not seem, I have not heard any promising stories out of Georgia lately. And so we really just know about the problems that they had in the primaries. And so, there was, as I understand it, Georgia is not mailing out to every voter an absentee ballot application. That was something that was potentially in the works. And so that's somewhat concerning. But right now I'm really worried about whether they're going to be able to they have the capacity to handle the volume of mail and other communication, whether the election officials do and whether the post office does. And then I'm continue to be worried about poll workers. And if there's anybody in Philadelphia who's on this call, become a poll worker. They need 8,500 people to be poll workers.
How many?
Over 8,000.
Why so many there?
Well, because they're a big city, and they have, whatever, 800 to 1,000 polling places or something like that.
Wow.
And I think it's probably close to 800. And you need a lot of workers for a lot of different aspects of the process. There are going to be new types of polling places there, but it's really important that we get poll workers there. People are probably familiar with this new group, powerthepolls.org, which is trying to get people to volunteer, and I'm trying to work with that as well. Anyway, that's a little bit longer than I meant to, but can dive into any of the states or any of the issues if you're interested.
So let's talk about, let's actually go through the states you flagged as areas of concern. You said you continue to be very worried about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the sort of ultimate battleground state. Why are we worried about Pennsylvania as opposed to Michigan or Wisconsin? You've talked about Florida, but what's particularly concerning about Pennsylvania?
So I have not seen some of the moves happen yet in Pennsylvania. I think that there is not a public plan yet for how Philadelphia is going to deal with its problems. And there is, as far as I can tell, there's very little in the way of resources coming down from the state to the localities, and the governor has not been particularly active there in trying to deal with these problems. A lot of that could change, and there may be stuff that's happening behind the scenes, but time is running out here. I mean, just so people understand where we are, people will start voting in 6 weeks. Right, that's where we are. It's not like everything's happening in November, right? The ballots are going to be mailed out in 5.5 weeks or so, and voting is going to start in some states. I'm concerned about Pennsylvania because they don't have robust early voting in person. They're not the primaries showed that they were not prepared for the volume of mail balloting. And it's not clear to me that they've made the infrastructural changes that they need to. They can, and there are competent people who are working in different localities there. But but that's why I'm concerned that I just haven't seen much movement yet. There are, I should say, we're working with several NGOs and election consultants there. I should advertise the work that we're doing through the Stanford MIT Healthy Elections Project. You can see it at healthyelections.org. And so we're trying to deal with these problems. And in particular, I'm focused on poll worker recruitment right now. But contrast that to Jocelyn Benson, who's the Secretary of State of Michigan, who has been aggressive across the board in every aspect of building the infrastructure. You go to her Twitter feed, she is doing recruitment for poll workers by herself. She did an incredible video on how to vote an absentee ballot, which I'm trying to get a celebrity to replicate so that we could get people so they understand how to vote.
I wrote to John Legend about this idea.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned this to you last time, didn't I?
And did you get in touch with Tim? I linked you and Tim up. I hope
we
that
spoke,
something
and
happened.
maybe he's, I'm just a law professor. I don't hang with the celebrities like you guys do, So
you're just still
that's
jealous
me.
about. You're just still jealous about Whit Stillman.
right. But my point is that you've got a Secretary of State in Michigan who has taken the bull by the horns and is really trying to attack all of these problems. Wisconsin, Wisconsin could go off the rails, but because of how polarized the state is. But a lot of the work that's being done at the county level, they heard the signal on primary election day, and my read of what's happening in Wisconsin is that that the localities, mainly the cities, have started to do some important things. This is public, so everyone can look it up for themselves. But one of the things that Wisconsin did is that they went out for private money to help out in 6 of the major cities in Wisconsin to help literally pay for all the infrastructure that they need to pull off this election. Our partners in election administration, the Center for Technology and Civic Life, working through the Center for Secure and Modern Elections, actually raised private money that then is going to go to help build out the mail balloting operation and everything else. And I did an interview on this recently. And I was like, look, it is an absolute embarrassment that we're having philanthropic donations for like the basics of running the democracy, right? It is, as I've said, it's like running a bake sale for our democracy, right?
Yeah.
But right. It's completely embarrassing.
We are
at that stage right now where you've got local jurisdictions who are they're going for handouts, right, to run these elections. But I think I've seen the plans for Wisconsin for those localities, and they're very developed. And so so like I said, with Pennsylvania, there may be more that's in the works than I've seen as of yet. But I haven't really seen it. And in Florida, I've talked to a few of the election officials, and it just, they don't seem to have money problems, strangely enough. I've been surprised to hear that. Maybe I'm not talking to the right people.
What are the money problems that people have in running elections? And I mean this I really do mean is it like to hire people to count ballots? It couldn't be for software for most of these places. Like, it's not, what is it?
So I'm trying to raise money for some of these jurisdictions. I'll tell you what I want it to go toward. So there's the normal funds. Assume that all the normal costs of an election are covered, which you shouldn't assume because states are actually contracting that money because of the recession. But even if you assume that, what are the new costs that the states and localities are experiencing because of the pandemic? You have to pay poll workers more. You have to recruit them. You should double them. That's one of the stories recently in some of these special elections, which is that the most successful localities are the ones who are paying poll workers, over $300 a day to try to be there for the day. That gets them out. Ballot drop-off boxes, right? The rollout of mail balloting, if you are North Carolina or Wisconsin, where you've had historic rates of mail balloting of like 5%, and then you're going to ramp up to 50% mail balloting, right? You have to either use like brute force and have 500 people in new people who you're going to be opening the mail. If you just do the math, like how many ballots?
Is there any type of vetting on the people they hired to count these votes too?
Yeah.
Like that would seem very important. Like you can't just take any poll worker. Like you might have nefarious kind of people.
So there are poll workers, and I saw someone in the chat also brought up an interesting issue in Pennsylvania where you need even numbers of Democrats or Republicans being poll workers. There are ways around that where you can appoint so-called machine inspectors, which are what we normally call poll workers. But so I had written some pieces early on in the pandemic saying, let's call out the National Guard, right? And Wisconsin did that, and that's really the only way that they did the primary. Now, since then, we've had the George Floyd murder and protests, and so the idea of bringing any military presence into the polling place, right, is pretty much off the table. But you need some group of people who are going to be performing the main functions of the democracy. But so getting the people is one thing. But you've got to automate. I mean, if you're going to be handling 1 million pieces of paper, now remember, it's not just the ballots themselves, right? But it's all the communication that goes into the election, as well as all the other stuff. You've got to automate the process, right? You've got to have some mail sorters, mail scanners, extractors, and the like. And so, those are the kinds of equipment that you need. The ballot drop box. All the PPE for the poll workers. There's all kinds of things that you need now for polling places that you didn't before. You need to disinfect voting machines, something that we never had to do before. All of that stuff are new expenses that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of good questions already piling up in the Q&A box. So let's deal with a few of those before we talk about the Healthy Elections Project and its collaboration with Lawfare. Tony Cava, the floor is yours.
Hello, and it sounds like you might have already been dealing with part of my questions. My first question is, why in the world is this so difficult when you have places like Washington and Oregon who have been doing mail-in for years, and aren't these states talking to each other? The other thing that maybe you haven't gotten to yet is there a way that we could be working to kind of encourage the media to behave responsibly, or are we kind of doomed to have breathless Wolf Blitzer complaining impatiently on the night of the 4th when we know for a fact that things are going to be delayed?
Right. So on the first point, Washington and Oregon, it took them several election cycles before they could really do vote by mail in a seamless way. And so I think there is cause for concern if a state just goes from, say, where Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin are, where they've had these very low levels of mail balloting, and then they go to all vote by mail, right? That Nevada has now decided to do this. Obviously, the president has been concerned about that. But what's happened, you cannot overnight flick a switch and turn a polling place state into a mail state. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The first is a mail ballot election is only as good as the address list that the state has, okay? And so the address lists in states that are not run by vote by mail are fraught with errors. And when I say it's not like just a few, I mean, you could have 10 to 15% of the voter list could have errors in it. That's all. I was on the voter list twice for many years in DC. Once as Benjamin Wittes, and once as my esteemed alter ego Benjamin Sittis, Sittes, who had the same address as I did and a different voter registration. Benjamin Sittis was registered as an independent, and I notified the district government on numerous occasions that I shared a house with somebody who was engaged in voter fraud. And I could not get Benjamin Sittis off the voter rolls for years. And then one day I mysteriously got a letter from the DC Board of Elections and Ethics informing Benjamin Sittis that he was suspected of voter fraud and was going to be removed from the rolls unless he showed cause. Which he failed to do and was removed from the voter rolls at some point. So I've never
Yeah, I mean, it is true that states that maintain voter rolls without otherwise maintaining a good sense of who lives where have all kinds of garbage in their voter rolls, which is mostly harmless because Benjamin Sidis, in fact, never turned out to vote.
That you
And
know of.
no, my colleague Molly Reynolds and I have actually tracked this because we were thinking of writing a piece about the strange case of Benjamin Sidis. He never voted, and it's mostly a harmless story. These sort of ghost registrations, but if you were to mail ballots to everybody on the district voting rolls right now, you'd have a lot of garbage ballots.
So that's one problem, which is that you've got, and you have Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck who are registered. And that's usually, those are the things that are trotted out in the vote fraud conversation. And you're right, that's just bloated rolls, and that causes problems. The more serious problem, right, is if they had the wrong address for you, right? So you're an actual person and they have the wrong address, and that happens frequently. That is going to be all the more true during the pandemic, where you have substantial numbers of people who are going to be moving their address, right? And so if I vote in, where I normally live, but I've been evicted or I've had to move or I'm taking care of my mother or something, again, the mail ballot has to get to you, right? And if you're a jurisdiction that doesn't have a lot of experience, it's not. This is the thing people don't understand. It's not like you just mail ballots to everyone. You have to mail the right ballot to the right person at the right address, because all of us, right, live in different splices of a jurisdiction because we have so many districts that capture us, that the ballot that Kate Klonick gets, right, will very likely be different than the ballot that someone across the street gets, right?
Oh, it actually is. It
Yeah.
actually is. I live right in the line.
Yes.
Like literally the person the other side of the other line gets a completely different ballot from me.
I was involved in the drawing of the congressional districts there, as you know. So
really? I know, but but that's that's an amazing point, because I'm just kind of I haven't. Here's another question, which I don't even, there's a million questions and I don't want to take them away from our audience, which is got some really great ones. But what's it mean that I'm voting in a place that I might never live again? Which is an interesting part of, that's my last known address. And this is a temporary address with the pandemic. So there's something about that seems it doesn't matter either place how I vote, frankly, for the federal elections. But
but the thing you're highlighting here is another. Again, if you just think of what my week looked like, right? What do you do with students voting this election? Where students are going to vote and if they're going to vote is a very difficult question, right? So if you are at the normally at the University of Michigan, but you're at your parents' home in California, right? Are you going to? Normally you're probably registered to vote in Michigan, right? You will be returning there, and the law says that you can vote there, but there's going to be a lot of acrimony over these questions as to where students are going to be voting. And for that matter, you have to have the wherewithal to request the absentee ballot. And this is, again, why you just can't mail ballots to everyone. The other thing is same-day registration, right, is dependent on some kind of infrastructure to get people through the polls. That's why we wrote Charles Stewart and I wrote a piece in The Atlantic a while ago saying, look, don't forget polling places, right? There are substantial numbers of people who are going to want to vote in polling places. By our poll, we've done a series of polls on this, and in the battleground states, it's about half and half. So half of people are going to vote in person. And so we shouldn't try to push everyone into a vote by mail. And this is particularly true. Now, obviously, there are Republicans now who are distrusting the mail because of what President Trump is saying, but African Americans in particular, younger voters, first-time voters, more likely to vote in person. And so we need to make sure that there are plentiful polling places so that they can have the opportunity to do that.
Speaking of which, our poll of the day is up and concerns what means you are going to use to vote. Take a moment to fill it out. And we are joined by the Big Blue blogger who has a question. You are backlit.
Why would we assume that? Shh. Yeah.
Gerrymandered 2 years ago. Tremendous boon to all of us. So thanks for that. You could actually probably track me down if Ben and Kate want to know who I am, because there were email transmissions going back and forth with the League of Women Voter folks, and I was one of the mappers on their behalf. And for the last 2 years, I've been taking credit for mapping Reading into Pennsylvania '06. So I hope you won't rat me out and claim that idea for yourself. Anyway, my question has to do with yesterday's Senate briefing, which of course was classified, but Senator Blumenthal has said all kinds of terrifying things in the aftermath of that briefing. I was wondering whether you have any insight on it that you can share in an unclassified way.
Well, let me say, first of all, this show's not about gerrymandering, but I'm happy to talk about it, ad nauseum. And by the way, you all should be paying attention to what's happening with the census. I know you probably haven't, but what's happening with the census, what they've just decided to do could be very influential in terms of apportionment. I'll just say that Pennsylvania, it is the court's plan. I was the court-appointed expert. I was not the special master, which I was in North Carolina, Connecticut, several other states, and so. I'm as the court-appointed expert. I can't talk about it. So let's talk about foreign interference in the election. So that I saw what Senator Blumenthal said. We've announced this at Stanford that my colleague Alex Stamos and I, along with a coalition of 3 other institutions, will be developing on the outside a kind of disinformation, coordinated inauthentic behavior detection system for this election. You should probably have him on, guys, again, if you're interested, because this is a new thing that if you look at the Stanford Internet Observatory online, you'll see what we're trying to do. But Alex is trying to develop on the outside what he had on the inside when he was head of security at Facebook, which is a kind of open source networking investigation team. My view, so I don't want to poo-poo the idea of foreign intervention in this election, right? Obviously, it was substantial last time around, but I would be the things that I'm most worried about are the new technologies that are being rolled out to deal with mail voting that are not necessarily tested. And so when we talk about the rush that's happened over the summer in all the procurement of this equipment, I do worry that they are not as secure as they could be. I don't think that's going to pose like an existential threat in terms of switching votes, but you could easily try to mess with some of these systems. The same is true of and when we're talking about the accuracy of the voter registration lists, right? The online voter registration lists were one of the issues that came up last time, and so you might see some probing there. The fact that Russia the thing that worries me about the media coverage of this is that there's going to be some Russian account that in the next month is going to say, there's a lot of fraud with mail balloting, and then everyone's going to say, look, the Russians are saying fraud with mail balloting. It's like, you don't need the Russians to say that. That is like already part of the ecosystem right now. It's like those kinds of signals are not, if anything, media coverage of the foreign angle is just going to amplify the content. I am worried about I think the voting machines. I was on the National Academy of Sciences panel dealing with the voting technology. I actually think the voting machines are pretty good, that we shouldn't worry about people going in and switching votes in the machines themselves. That's not true across the country, but in most of the battleground states, I feel pretty good about that. It's all the other stuff. And if you had to ask me, like, what's the most, not maybe the most insecure system, but something that I'm concerned about is the election night reporting system. This is something that's totally understudied. There's a good student on the call who wants to, write about this. How does the information get from the polling place to the state and then onto the website, and then frankly, the Associated Press, because the Associated Press is basically our national election authority that reports the results. And if you are a foreign actor, want to screw with and undermine confidence, one thing you could do is try to mess with those results. All the more so because you're going to have results trickling out over the course of a week because the mail balloting is going to be very slow. So I don't have any particular insight on what is happening with foreign messing with this election. You can be sure that they'll be trying to do stuff, but I think that there's so much disinformation and polarization in our current environment that it's going to be just more noise.
So we just had a conversation about this on the Rational Security episode that we taped an hour before in lieu of fun. I do think there are a few things you can say more by process of elimination than anything else about what is and is not encompassed in Pelosi's comments and Blumenthal's comments after that briefing. So the first thing is, it's pretty clearly not a hacking and dumping operation, which was the most effective thing the Russians did during 2016. And we know it's not that. It could be a hacking operation, but it's not a dumping operation because dumping involves a public act. And we haven't seen anything like, WikiLeaks releases of information, nor have we had any, significant disclosures of data breaches by any of the campaigns or committees. So I think you can pretty well for now exclude that. The second thing is the scariest stuff that was in the SSCI report and to a lesser extent in the Mueller report was infiltrations and probing of state level voting and voter registration databases.
Yeah.
I think if you had that sort of thing, there would have been notification to the states in question. The states in question would have sent up a smoke signal about it. So I think I agree with Nate that it is probably unlikely to be evidence that there is compromise of election equipment or voting registration systems. And broadly speaking, that leaves two areas. One is the broad space of information operations. And the second space, which gets less attention, but maybe deserves some, is the injection of human assets into the American political system, a la Maria Butina and that sort of thing. I think both of those are distinctly possible. And we're probably talking about some activity that's broadly speaking within one of those spaces. Both of them are bad. Both of them are things that we should be taking very seriously as a society. And both of them are things that we should have immune responses as a society against that are adequate to protect our election systems from. And so I think it is preponderantly likely that, we are not dealing with, a compromise of the vote in that sense. Beyond that, I think it's a pretty open ball game.
Let me say one thing on the assets point, which I think I agree with you on that. And if you talk to the people at the platforms, in Silicon Valley, what's really changed, I think, for them in the last 4 years is their inability to attribute disinformation. That it's extremely difficult to figure out whether there's a Russian inside the United States who's actually putting this stuff up, whether it's an authentic American who's putting this up, or whether it's being served from abroad. And so I do think it is happening. And, you should expect the same kind of polarizing messages, the issue ads, all that kind of, I think the advertising side, which was, I think, exaggerated 4 years ago, is not where you're going to see most of it. It's all the organic content and the whipping up of lack of confidence, because there's going to be a lot of people who are anxious about this election and the way it's being run. And it's very easy to, erode people's confidence.
And there's also it's very easy to misinform people about the mechanics of voting in a way that will increase rather than decrease the likelihood that votes will be disqualified or that people will not successfully cast a ballot. So I want to shift to the Healthy Elections Project, but before we do, there's been a bunch of questions which I'm going to kind of distill into one about this question of media on the night of the election. And, I have a certain impatience with this because I actually know the law, which is, the law is really clear that there is you know, there is a period of time under the federal safe harbor law that a state has to count its votes. It's, what is it? It's 35 days, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And what we get on election night is not who won the election. It's who the press, particularly the Associated Press, is projecting won each state based on a combination of exit polling and unofficial tallies as they come in. And so when the president gets up and says we should know on election night who won, that is actually nonsense, right? I mean, we should know 35 days after the election when the state secretaries of state certify the vote in their states who won the election. Is there, like, should there be any expectation, like, if the Associated Press wants to project who won the state of Wisconsin, fine. And if somebody wants to concede the election based on it, fine. But that is actually not the election. Am I
No,
misstating that?
That's right. Let me just add one other thing to that, which is that, leave aside the Electoral Count Act, which you're talking about which gives the safe harbor, and people who were alive and familiar with Bush versus Gore may have gone through that before. But each state has different rules about what the deadlines are for counting the votes. And so what may happen this time is that some of the state laws have not been updated, and so you will have the canvassing boards that may break state law. Now, what happens when that happens? You know, they'll muddle through. There'll be court cases if it's close. I mean, as I've said before on the show, that you know, there's the election administrator's prayer, which is, "Oh God, whatever happens, please don't let it be close."
Don't let it be close.
If it's not close, then then AP may call this on election. Like, for example, if Texas, they have much less absentee ballots than most places. If Texas is either razor thin, or let alone if Biden wins, that's a pretty good indication about what has happened nationally. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but that's an example. But we all need to sort of inculcate in our friends in the media the message that you have to assume that this is election week, not election day. That there will be, I mean, if you had to I am hesitant to do this, but you know, in lieu of fun, I will, which is how many ballots will not be counted by midnight on election day? Of the roughly 140 million that'll be cast, it will certainly be 20 million, right? The question is if it will be much more than that, right? I mean, 10 to 20 million that you would just expect. And the problem is, right, that there's going to be all of the millions of ballots that need to be verified, right? We don't want this process to be rushed because when they rush this, what you're worried about is that they're going to disqualify legitimate ballots. We at Stanford did this policy lab on signature verification. We actually did it before the coronavirus epidemic. We just happened to have some students who were really interested in this. And what goes in, you know, when mail ballots come in, you have to verify them against the list. You have to compare the signatures, right? It takes time. And so it's going to take us, you know, a week to figure out the results in some cases.
I have a quick question. So on kind of some of this, what I'm really curious about, and this kind of is a tie-in to Ben's point, which is like that you have these people that the networks hire to stand outside of swing state polls and take these polling stations and take polls as people leave, exit voting.
Exit polls,
but like, exit polls, which have always been kind of like, we've had problems with those, and that changes the actual like turnout on election day as they're reported live, those exit polls, like things like that. But what I was kind of curious about is like, is there going to be, so for example, I'm voting with absentee ballot. If I get that in early, is that going to be counted early? Is someone going to open that before election day? And if they do, like, are we going to have like some type of fucking news report that's like, hey, there's 15 million people in Pennsylvania that have already voted for Biden, and that changes the entire outcome? And so there has to, like, I just feel like there has to be some ethical, if not legal, obligation on the networks and the press, without violating the First Amendment, to like basically like rein it in and come to some type of industry standard on this?
Well, so the first thing is, who's the press, right? We know that some people are going to be calling the election before election day, even, right? And so the question, the question was CNN, MSNBC, and CBS, right? Are they going to hold their fire here? Fox, who knows what will happen? But I have to say that Fox decision desk people are actually quite good.
The whole polling department there is terrific.
Yeah, and so
Why do you guys say that as opposed to
No,
any
the
of
Fox
other
poll is
networks?
one of the best polls in the business. I mean, it's up there with the post ABC poll and the
And Gallup?
Gallup is
AP?
actually Gallup is not an especially strong poll these
Oh.
days, but
Yeah.
but the they're Fox is a very, very fine polling department. It's one of the, and interestingly, it's been very independent, and the president is very upset about it.
Not just the polls, but also the decision desk, right, which is the polling group, and so the if you remember in 2012, right, there was the fight as to whether they could declare that Barack Obama had won Ohio, and Karl Rove was throwing a fit, saying no. Right, he didn't win, and the decision desk was saying, no, actually he did, and it showed their independence, in real time. So
meanwhile, Wolf Blitzer was hovering around in his hologram. I will never forget that. That was the fucking worst. I hated the Wolf Blitzer hologram.
You need norms, right, to govern what's going to happen on election night, to be sure. But your question is actually a very complicated question, which is, well, what determines what happens to an absentee ballot once it's received by a jurisdiction? And the answer is, it depends on the state. And it is, you will not have results that are reported before election night. So it's not like you're going to start seeing the tallies or anything like that. One thing you can do, though, and I believe certainly North Carolina does this, I believe Georgia does, but I have to look at that. You can see who voted, and so you can make some predictions. Michael McDonald at University of Florida does some of this predictive modeling, where if you see since they have race on the voter file, you can figure out how many African Americans maybe have turned out, and so you can get a sense of what might be happening. But then there's some states like Michigan where you cannot open the ballots until the polling places close on Tuesday. Okay, you cannot open the absentee ballots, right? Most states, you can at least do the processing, the verification, right, where you just do the signature check-ins. And one of the reasons that's really important is you've got 1% of people who don't put their signature on the ballot, right? And it's a big problem, and there's huge racially disparate impacts for that. As well as people who have signature mismatches. And so if you have the processing of these ballots early, then you can give these people an opportunity to cure any problem in their ballots. But your question about, like, is it counted right then? Not necessarily. And it really just depends on the state.
But there's a sense in which it is counted, which is not by the state, not officially, but by the pollsters, because when people poll after early voting starts, the first question they ask is, have you already voted?
Yeah.
And when you say yes to that, then you go in a different category. You're not a registered voter. You're not a likely voter. Your probability of voting becomes 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very different, the polls are very interested in people who have already voted.
Yeah.
And as are the parties, because if you can lock in, there are some states that are going to have voting open in mid-September. If you can get as many people to vote in late September as possible, well, you've really decreased your burden as time approaches election day. So the pollsters, it is not of zero significance, even if they're not allowed to open the ballot, in terms of the amount of information that we have. And I remember in 2016 in Nevada, a journalist in Las Vegas named John Ralston, who's very worth following on Twitter for purposes of Nevada politics. Ralston managed to predict with enormous precision Clinton's victory in Nevada based on patterns of early voting alone. And that just had to do with how divided the state is by county, and the number of early votes in X county versus Y county turns out to be really predictive of things. Efforts to do that in North Carolina almost completely failed. And so it's really variable state by state when you can get away with predicting things based on the early vote.
Also,
all right.
Can I just say one thing on that?
Yeah, please.
One of the important things here is that different states will report who has voted. So if you're the campaigns, right, you can bank your votes and you know who has sent in the mail ballot.
All right, let's use the remaining time to talk about the Healthy Elections Project and the project with Lawfare. So before we get into the Lawfare collaboration, what is the Healthy Elections Project, and what are you guys broadly trying to do?
So Charles Stewart at MIT and I started this project, the Stanford MIT Healthy Elections Project, which you can see at healthyelections.org, in order to provide some venue for academic collaboration with election officials and NGOs to try to adapt the electoral system to the COVID environment. And so on the website, you will see a lot of research that our students have put out that we've been doing sort of postmortems on the battleground states. So these questions you're asking about the situation in different states, you'll be seeing more about that. But we've also dealt with issues like the election administration supply chain, all these kinds of infrastructural questions Kate was asking about, or vote by mail resources, or we're going to have a guide to healthy polling places that we will hope to gives out to different jurisdictions so that they can put it into place. This has mushroomed into a bigger project than we even expected. The Hewlett Foundation gave us some seed grant at the beginning, and then others have been interested in this. And so we've really tried to network with the other groups that we think are developing tools that local election officials can use to develop healthy voting. So this includes mail balloting tools that are provided by Democracy Works. It has a polling place design tool to try to maintain social distance in the polling place developed by the University of Rhode Island. There's polling place siting tools that are developed by a group at USC. There's a line management tool that Charles and his colleagues developed at MIT. And so the idea is, with a little bit of money, can we take the tools that already exist and then change them in a way that election officials will be able to adapt to the COVID environment, and then to really, provide resources to the public so that they can see what's going on out there. And so that's why we're thrilled with the partnership of Lawfare, because you're making our very academic research readable for a larger audience.
Yeah, so let's talk about so these memos that you guys have been producing are just an amazing resource. And so first of all, for anybody who's interested in the nitty-gritty of sort of situation reports from states, but also, as Nate says, issue-specific stuff, supply chain security for voting tech, comparative research. There's a really interesting memo about how South Korea pulled off elections in this environment. There's just a lot of really good stuff. It's exquisitely nonpartisan. And we figured we could kind of turn these very detailed legal memoranda into, medium length articles. So still pretty substantial, 3,000 to 4,000 words, but not legal memoranda. So what we've done is we've created on Lawfare Healthy Elections page, which contains, as we distill these down into these articles, and these are by students as well as young lawyers who've really done kind of amazing work. We are just adding them to this page. And so I think right now we have up the the Arizona report.
New Hampshire.
We have New Hampshire up, and we have an introductory post, Nate and Charles and me. And we will be adding to them quickly over the next several weeks. So, keep an eye on Lawfare for kind of distillations of these documents. And then you can go to the healthy, if there's for your particular state, or if there's an issue that you're particularly interested in, or if you just want to dive deep into the subject in general, the memos from which these articles are distilled some of them are 40, 50 pages long. They're very substantial, serious documents, and they're all available on healthyelections.org, right?
Yep. And then I've put links to everything in the feed, in the chat feed. So you should have the Healthy Elections Project on Lawfare, which is the distilled kind of like blog length version. And then also, of course, you can go to healthyelections.org.
I'll also say that in addition to, because we have law students, but we have also political scientists who've done some of this. So if you look, for example, let's go to the Florida memo, and we're going to have one on North Carolina very soon, which is going to be very interesting. I mean, Charles Stewart is really one of the best, is the best in the business on this. And so we have unearthed certain things like the disparate rate of uncounted ballots in Florida, why that, their African Americans and Latinos are having their ballots not counted at a higher rate. We're seeing this with young people and first-time voters. And so, we're hoping that the research will actually make a difference, that it's not just interesting, but it'll affect people's decisions on how to run the election.
On that note, Nate Persily, thanks so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Nate, you're one of the hardest working people that I know in this business. And
both of you guys are too. I mean, yeah. I joke with Kate. Every time I see you guys in my Facebook feed or it's in my Twitter feed, it's like you're following me around the internet. So, we have to talk to you one-on-one.
We haven't missed a day in 132 days, but it's only an hour a day. Whereas what you're doing is, maybe you get an hour a day when you're not doing this stuff. So, I wouldn't trade places in the workload department.
Thank you.
Nate Persily, you're a great American, and with any luck and all your hard work, we will actually pull off a successful election. Kate, who do we have tomorrow?
Oh, tomorrow's Cash Hill, Cashmere Hill.
Cash
so that'll
Hill.
Be great. Yeah.
And then Friday is my mom. Mom is coming on the show, and unlike a lot of people who bring their mothers on the show, I am bringing on my mother on the show for purely substantive reasons. Guest requests. She is a pioneering expert on the conduct of clinical trials, and is going to talk about COVID trials as well as the disruption to normal trials that COVID is wreaking on the biomedical research establishment. So also, she's good fun, and yeah, she's my mom. So until then, Kate, oh no, it's my turn today, isn't it?
Until then, Ben.
We don't have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, you can at least find out what the rules are for getting a ballot in your jurisdiction, what the rules are for filing it properly so it's going to be counted, and get it in with a healthy margin of error so that, there's just not going to be a question that you are one of the people whose ballots count this year.
We hope you can do it without John Legend.
Yeah, look, if we have to bombard your Twitter feed with instruction videos, we're going to do it. But You, the people who are watching this show, are the people who shouldn't need help with that. So just get it done. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, Nate. Bye, Ben. See you guys
See you
later.
soon.